Hi. So, where do we even start? So, for starters, I think I'll first outline the potential list of reasons or arguments as to what is leading this very violent stock reaction. And from there on, I will pair it along with how I look or how I read the entire situation with my own analysis, and maybe end off this quick discussion with the million-dollar question. What are we going to do with our current existing position, or even for prospective investors? How should they look at this recent share price development? Are you going to sell? Is there a new price target? How do you allocate your portfolio, so on and so forth? So this video is clearly not planned or scripted, so if you like this kind of timely videos, just help me tap the cute little like button. And with that in mind, let me just first walk you through some of the potential reasonings that are cited both online and offline. I'm thinking about why Alibaba is reacting so positively and why investors are going out to buy the shares en masse. So of course, the first and foremost thing is that I think just last week alone, we are getting some news, I've forgotten was it from Wall Street Journal or some insiders, talking about how Jack Ma, which is the original founder of Alibaba, is back in the trenches. And for whatever that it's worth, it does seem like they're trying to craft a narrative that he is a man on a mission. And they basically coined the term MAGA, making America great again, to making Alibaba great again. And take it for what it's worth, it's good for storytelling, but how does it impact the company's execution and the bottom line at the end of the day to shareholders? That I'm not too sure. And of course, some of these pointers that I'm going to list out, they are not in orders of importance. I'm just listing them out based on the timeline. So Jack Ma is back. I think that's at the top of the list, and it happened roughly 1 to 2 weeks ago. And moving from there, I think one of the more latest news, which was released yesterday, was that Cathie Wood, she bought back into Alibaba after a 3 to 4 year hiatus, after first selling it before or during the entire technology crackdown. And I'm not sure if she knew anything beforehand of what they're going to announce in the recent Ali Cloud conference. I think kudos to her. She didn't sell at the highest, nor did she buy at the lowest, but she did kind of sit out of the entire drawdown over the last 3 years or so. And right after she bought the next day, the stock basically jumped 9%. Yesterday, Alibaba also just launched their new open source Qwen 3 Max model, and it's the biggest and most capable model yet. And thereafter, earlier in the day, they actually hosted their Ali Cloud conference, and there were quite a few developments or announcements that probably got investors extremely excited. So the management team did outline their commitment into building and expanding globally, and part of their global expansion plan is to come up with the first data center in Brazil, France and Netherlands, and more importantly, expand their footprint in Mexico, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, etc. The long and short of it is they are going to be a global powerhouse in the cloud computing space. We also have news coming out saying that there will be some physical AI cooperation with NVIDIA. At least over the past 2 years, any companies that tie their name together with NVIDIA, you'll see the share price go up by 10-20% the following day. So of course, it's a little bit too early to tell in terms of the efficacy and the deepness in terms of the partnership, but anything remotely related to NVIDIA, I think investors will just eat it up. So, and specific to this cloud conference, I have yet to dive deeper and digest all the content, but I'm going to leave the 2 links into the description below of what I've consumed. I haven't go through the entire thing, but just a general sensing. And I watched the CEO's opening remark. It's in Chinese. If you don't understand, there is a transcript provided in the link below. You can just copy everything and just ask ChatGPT to translate it for you. And the second one, hosted on their own Ali Cloud YouTube channel. That conference is recorded throughout the entire 2-3 hours experience. And with that in mind, I think one of the most important reasons that the market reacted so positively was really when Eddie Wu, which is the CEO of Alibaba, outlining his vision and commitment for the future, which I'll dive deeper into the second part. But before we go into that, one additional quick pointer that could potentially also explain this recent rally. China's regulator, which is the SAMR, the State Administration for Market Regulation, actually came out to say that they're going to rein in excessive competition in the meal delivery sector. And as you know, I've actually spent quite a few episodes talking about the state and the dynamics of the food delivery war in China today. Initially with Meituan versus JD, and then Alibaba coming in and JD retracting their participation in the subsidy war. It does seem like we are making very good progress here as the regulators step in and they try to implement a few of these different rules, including and notwithstanding drafting rules to cap cap restaurant fees, increasing transparency on subsidies and discounts, and they actually forbid coercive practices both on merchants and drivers. So on first look, based on market consensus, it does seem like these rules are largely just formalized agreements reached by the regulators and the discussions with the existing players. So when trying to compare the impact of these new rules to the incumbents versus the new disruptors, it does seem like the effects on the potential disruptors are greater. Companies like Pinduoduo, Douyin and Kuaishou, which all are trying to also push into quick commerce. And they cannot use just the traditional subsidize and sell approach, and they probably have to rethink the strategy. But regardless of who wins, I think for both Alibaba and Meituan, I do have a portfolio exposure. That said, if the new rivals coming in like Pinduoduo, Douyin or Kuaishou, that I think would be a much more dire consequences, at least for my own investing portfolio per se. Now, going back to the point, how do I look at this regulator stepping in? They have already signaled to both the market and investors that they're going to step in, they're going to draft out regulations, they're going to put a stop to a lot of all these nonsensical spending. So at first glance, you might think that it's a good thing because companies might be forced to cut back their spending or subsidy. But that said, I think never underestimate all these Chinese companies. They can come up with very creative ways to skirt or to circumvent some of these regulations. And don't ask me why they still dare to do it. So this might not be the end of it. And I don't think that we should take this news at face value, fully trusting the idea that once the regulators step in, subsidy war is going to stop. Yes, I think on paper it might stop, but they can do a lot of creative things underneath the surface. So that's just my own perspective on this thing. It will still be ongoing, but with the regulators' eyes on the business, I think it will be a lot milder and it will not go as extreme or as aggressive as we have seen thus far. Moving on to Eddie Wu's vision and commitment, I think his talk was roughly 25 minutes. I'm not going to tell you word by word or to translate the entire speech, but I'm just going to extract out some of the things that I felt was important, which could also give investors that kind of confidence into thinking that Alibaba's back in game and to make them great again. I think the first and foremost thing that captured my attention was the idea of the usage of tokens. So especially in the cloud computing and the AI space, a lot of the discussions talking about being the next phase or the next frontier of civilization. And it could potentially be as important or even more important than electricity. And from Alibaba's use case or internal data, they are seeing that the usage of tokens are doubling every 2 to 3 months. And that is a very, very significant pace because I think as investors, we know the power of compounding. And I think this comment has probably two main significance. The first point is much more about showing investors or showing the world that China's AI is back, or in that sense, adoption is really starting to take place. And it's no longer just building sandcastles in the air and promising investors that, oh, AI is going to be the future, cloud is going to be the future, but it doesn't show in your bottom line or it doesn't show in your top line growth rates. Point is more about the proof of concept. Adoption is real and it's starting to get widespread. The second more important point is really the idea of scaling and the potential for scalability. So I think we have already seen that the world ex-China, particularly in the US, there are a lot of use cases. A lot of all these mega tech companies or hyperscalers, they are building at an unprecedented rate. They keep claiming that supply is not enough, demand is overwhelming and things like that. So for China, I think the story has always been the same the last 2-3 years. Alibaba is running the same playbook. They say that, there's a lot of demand and things and we are still in the early stage of this entire S-curve. But it doesn't reflect the numbers. And it is only until the last 3 to 4 quarters per se, we are starting to see numbers start to tick up. So with these two factors in mind, which is both proof of concept and the scaling laws being applied here in China today, that's why investors are very excited. So they are proving it both with a lot of confidence behind what they're saying and also in terms of their numbers, which I expect will continue to scale even higher. And henceforth, I believe that the share price is trying to front run this entire situation and trying to price in what is an appropriate premium for this new growth curve for Alibaba. And the entire scope of Eddie Wu's discussion was that he no longer wants to talk about AI or talk about AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. His point of his argument was that AGI has already become some sort of a certainty. Instead, it is a start. and they are going to focus on ASI, which is artificial superintelligence. And so there are three main phases to this ASI phenomenon. The first phase is emergent intelligence, which is learning from human. We have kind of seen this growth stage over the last 2 years, where we see a lot of all these large language models feeding on all the existing knowledge, whether is it through text, through videos, or through some of these other means, mostly through the internet as well. Phase 2, which is probably where we are currently in, it's more on AI agency. There is a lot of conversations around agentic AI and how agents could act autonomously while assisting the human tasking or human needs. And the main benchmark or yardstick here is that AI no longer just interact with human beings through text only. So large language models can probably also start to use different APIs, tools, and even utilize solutions autonomously to fulfill a certain output. And the more important criteria or preset criteria to move on to phase 3 is for them to have the ability, which is for these AI models or AI infra, to be able to connect to the real physical world and to co-create solutions and not just be waiting for inputs from human beings. So the main point of contention here is that I think it remains a huge challenge if a human being is required to be in the middle band to synthesize and to extract information from the real world and then pass it down to the AI to do their computation. Because by trying to arrange and categorize all these different findings and analysis before pumping it to the AI, there are always some diffusion issues, challenges of translating insights, and the data become secondhand. It's not the real source data, and it might be influenced by the human bias. And his main point is really more about how we shouldn't be coding the AI with rules or laws, but instead just let them interact with the real world and they can come up with the solutions, rather than how we dictate the boundaries of how AI should operate in. And of course, this probably steps into the ethical boundaries of how far off do we want to allow for AI to integrate into the human psyche, but that's besides the point. I think he's just pointing out his own observation. And of course, the last phase, the third phase, is self-improvement, where the AI at the end of the day is able to self-reinforce learning, able to create synthetic data, train on them, and just outperform humans at the end goal. And truth be told, even after halfway watching into the 3-hour long conference, more often than not, I'm not a technical person to understand all the different jargons and how things fall into place, but I try my best to read up and to catch up these sort of knowledge in these domains. And the funny thing is actually, I have been consuming a lot of US-based, a lot of all these AI-related content to understand how things are working as well. And a lot of the discussions that Eddie Wu is talking about is not necessarily new, and it's not necessarily something innovative or things that we don't know. A lot of all these tug of war between ethical considerations, allowing AI to integrate, to self-learn through synthetic data, to improve and ultimately reach general intelligence or super intelligence. I do believe that before this conference, a lot of people are discounting the technology advancement in the Chinese ecosystem. Investors are expressing a view to Alibaba and they're just basically playing catch up. It's not so much trying to emphasize a premium, saying that Alibaba should trade at a much more expensive valuation to Meta or to Amazon or to Microsoft because they have a very capable and very superior product. But it does seem like, at least based on yesterday's disclosure, Alibaba's new Quen model, it's kind of outperforming a lot of their benchmarks and even comparable to Llama models, which is from Meta. So at least at this current phase, I don't think the market is trying to ascribe a premium of Alibaba over the US counterparts, but more like trying to push them up to a more comfortable and decent valuation. And to recognize their efforts in that case. So that's just my own perspective, of course. Eddie Wu also made 2 more claims. The first one being LLM, which is large language models, they're going to be the next operating system. Operating system in the sense where they're not going to replace Windows, but more so in future, all the demands and solutions will go through some of these leading LLMs. And he expects there will only be 5 to 6 leading models in the world, whether is it from software to agent to calculations, everything will be into these 5 or 6 main models. And softwares will no longer be governed by individual companies as we see right now, but all through the LLM, and most of these software companies will probably go extinct. Now, the second main point that he made was that AI cloud is probably going to be the next computer. And the tokens that we talked about initially, it will be the electricity of the future. And AliCloud's new strategic position will be to be a full-stack AI service provider. And Quen has now the largest and most global exposure as an open source provider. They are downloaded 600 million times and they've the deepest integration. So a lot of all these numbers being thrown out here, and they're going to invest a lot more money compared from 2022 to 2032, he's also going to probably 10x their capacity. So like I said, a lot of numbers are being thrown out here. They have a lot of commitment. They're trying to make it very upbeat. I understand, because it is the CEO's role to sell this idea to the world so that more people get onto their platform. They can iterate, they can improve, they can continue lock-ins, and they can get the flywheel going. I understand. But always, I'm trying to err on the side of caution. Being downloaded the most number of times doesn't mean you're the best model. Sometimes people just need a quick solution. And in this case, they really didn't expand much or give greater details on whether people are very sticky on the platform, whether they continue using it, is there any form of loyalty, maybe they just downloaded and didn't deploy after some time and things like that. So a lot of the numbers are big, nice, part of doing sales. But especially for shareholders, at the end of the day, we only care about one metric, which is earnings per share. How does all these translates to growth, and how does it translate to earnings, which will then benefit me through buybacks or dividends or what have you not. So not forgetting that fact, that is still the North Star, even though a lot of all these new developments and iterations are very exciting. So if I can summarize, in terms of AliCloud's plan, they still continue to stay open. That's part of their DNA now. They are cultivating a huge developer ecosystem. They're trying to build a super AI cloud. They want to vertically integrate everything from hardware to software and to be the one-stop model/agent platforms for anything under the sun. In terms of investment scale, they did share that initially the 380 billion RMB over 3 years for AI infrastructure, that works out to be roughly 50 billion US dollars. I think that part, based on his commitment and his upbeatness and optimism, we are probably going to see even more expansion in terms of spending into infra and to expand this whole business arm. So the practical takeaways, I think as a summary, is that firstly, of course, it's going to be an agentic economy moving forward. I think anyone under the world can program with normal human natural languages. There'll be millions of new developers enriching the entire ecosystem, and there'll be an explosion of bespoke agents that can try to tailor to different taskings. Of course, the entire integration into the real world, which focuses a lot on data authenticity and extraction, where the raw data itself becomes a mode for self-learning systems. And lastly, of course, for investors, I think capital expenditure intensity will probably remain high, will continue to remain high going into the future, and platforms that control compute, model, and data pipelines stand to capture outsized value, at least based on his discussion. So with all that in mind, I think for existing Baba investors, you guys are probably extremely excited. You have been stuck in this probably for the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, for those of you who have been in the OG club. But that said, I think as the saying goes, the stock doesn't know you own them. They don't know what's your entry price. They don't know what's your exit price. And there is a very serious and ongoing conversation around the community itself. I've seen a lot of people talk about it, and some people even ask me, so what are you going to do about your Alibaba position? I think I'll split these investors up into 3 main groups. I think the first group, which I've seen being quite vocal on social media as well, is that a lot of them do have intrinsic values calculated for Alibaba to be between $150 to $180. And by the time this video is out, I think Alibaba is trading close to 170, 180. So once it hits your intrinsic value, then the next question is, what are you going to do? So the stock is so-called quote-unquote fairly valued. Are you going to sell? Redeploy the capital elsewhere? Are you going to hold? I think that's always the million-dollar question. The second group of investors is those that think that Alibaba is still extremely undervalued. It has turned into a growth stock. There is so many S-curve and potential opportunities out there. The third group, which I will consider as the rest. So the rest meaning those that are prospective investors, they don't have any existing positions, they're interested because of the recent excitement and potential. And the second group probably would be those that initially got burnt, they have exited at a loss, and they're thinking whether they should jump right back in. And to share my thoughts on these 3 different groups, I think the easiest one to tackle is the second group. So for those of you who think that there is still a lot of potential, a lot of excitement, Alibaba is just at the start of the new AI and cloud earnings super cycle. Just hold on. I think simple as that. The first group, especially those that think the intrinsic value is between $150 to $180, I think you can mark my words, you can record down this video. Within the next few days or next few weeks, you're probably going to see a lot of all these investment banks or all these giving price targets. They're going to start moving up their price targets from the initial 150, 160 to probably closer to 200, 220. I don't know why, but clearly the price targets move together with the stock price, which kind of in and of itself defeats the purpose of a price target. But that's besides the point. I think specifically for yourself, for those of you who operate in this sort of environment of trying to find undervalued stocks, once they revert to fair value, you sell out. I think that's your thing. And if you do have a specific set of criteria or rules, please feel free to follow them and find or move on to the next undervalued company. But for those of you that I identify closer with, probably those that are more of like growth at reasonable price, I'm trying to find quality companies that are undervalued, especially when such a company start to turn into a growth stock again, and there's a very good storytelling or narrative to it, and you're probably going to see it in the numbers in the upcoming few quarters as well when earnings and growth start to re-accelerate. Even though, yes, they're going to burn a lot of money, their bottom line free cash flow is going to suck. But even though the stock price could, quote-unquote, be fairly valued, if growth comes back, I think your intrinsic value will be recalculated very aggressively upwards in a very short period of time. So that's just some perspective there as well. And also the comparison, let's say, transitioning from a value stock to a growth stock, there's an important distinction here is that, and I think it depends solely on what's the trade-off and what do you prefer. So the initial value stock narrative was more of Alibaba's business stabilizing. They're still one of the biggest players in e-commerce and cloud. If they're able to just grow at a very simple mid to high single digits, print free cash flow, maintain their margins, and just do their buybacks, it will be a very steady 8 to 10% compounder. Versus somebody that is going all in into the next frontier of cloud and AI, they're spending a huge ton of money and they're going to show it in growth. And then the monetization or the earnings per share will come in later in the future. And you have to decide which side of the plane do you want to stand on. And if you're uncomfortable with the spending and you think that the EPS and the margins will not accrue to shareholders in the longer term, then yeah, I think this transition over to a growth stock might not suit you. And moving on to the last bucket of people, that is either you are burnt before or you have never touched Alibaba stock and you're interested in it. I think you can start off by asking yourself why you're interested in it in the first place and start to do a little bit more homework rather than just buy and start a position to 3, 5, 10% of your portfolio. If you want a starter position to keep yourself accountable, maybe you can consider. But that's it. I really do want to caution against FOMO, fear of missing out. And I do see some conversations and some investors insinuating that you might regret it if you don't hop onto this train. The boat is leaving and things like that. For that, I do believe that the stock market is big enough for many boats to be leaving. And if you miss this quote-unquote train, and if you really don't have the conviction or you don't have a very good understanding or grasp of the company and what are their economics and what makes the company tick, then I think you shouldn't be necessarily investing in the stock in the first place. And for those of you who have been scarred, then take that as a good lesson. Relook at the processes on what went wrong and come back to fight another day. And of course, the stock market doesn't dictate that if you lost money on Alibaba, you have to make back your money on Alibaba. So because of this dynamics and fluidity, it's more important to stay grounded and to know exactly what you want out of this and how you want to play this game. And with that in mind, I hope this sharing was timely and interesting enough, and I'll see you guys in the next video. But more importantly, I'll see you on the moon. Goodbye.